Welcome to Longevity Industries, presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. Special thanks to our sponsors, Local Enterprise, that's Enterprise with a Z, home of the CodyBot, which is, of course, the robot for sanitizing, disinfecting, and temperature measurement of your employees. And unfortunately, this is a time we still need it during COVID. And, of course, the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation. I have an incredible guest on here today. With me today is Mont Handley from Purdue University Northwest. He is the entrepreneur in residence there. And of course, he has been a startup and founder of PitMoss and Plantennas. If I can say that correctly, hopefully I didn't screw that up too bad. Welcome, Mont.
You got it right. Well, thank you very much, Dean.
It is great to have you here today. Mont and I met through working on some projects through Purdue University, and it's great to have you here. Tell us right off the bat, what can we learn over the next 5 years that's going to have a big impact for us?
I will tell you, I'm old enough to remember when everyone said, get into computers, it's going to be the future. And at that time, computers filled entire offices, entire floors of buildings. And that was what we thought of as computers. And now we all carry them in our pockets with our mobile phones. I will tell you, over the next 5 years, it's going to be all about robotics. And as a small and medium-sized enterprise and startup manufacturer myself, I can see how this is going to be very, very valuable in the next 5 years, especially now when it's so difficult to find help at all levels of the economy, but especially at the small and medium-sized enterprise level. I'm seeing every day the democratization of this technology, of robotics. I'm seeing every day new applications being spun out from robotics, and I just think if you are an entrepreneur or a CEO, if you don't know much about robotics, I would start reading some books, take some courses, hire a consultant to find out how you can use robotics to make your business more efficient, because, I have a feeling that your competitors are going to be doing that, and they will be able to make products cheaper, more efficiently, and that may just lead to your demise. So that would be my takeaway about the next 5 years.
I think that's great insight too, because you're absolutely right. The challenges we're seeing now with workforce development and actually having people to fill positions, there's such a shortage, and there will be even more of a shortage as more people start to retire. And we're going to have to find solutions. I often tell people that I'm a huge advocate and a supporter of education. I truly am, and I believe that is our future. But the key word there is future. That's not tomorrow, and manufacturers have to adjust tomorrow or even today for that. And I think robotics is a great stopgap to make it through that this more challenging time that we're in. Tell us a little bit about your background. Tell us about your time on Shark Tank and everything else to do with your companies and how you came to be at Purdue University.
Sure. Well, I started out just having a little dream of starting my own business. I had invented a product while working for someone else that's now called PitMoss, and it is a PittMoss replacement made from recycled paper to replace something that's actually dug out of highly sensitive wetlands. And the more I learned about it, the more I realized there was a definite need for an alternative. So the company was something that I thought of 20 years ago, and I slowly worked my way through a commercialization process. At that time, there really wasn't anything, like what we call entrepreneurial education. In the 90s and stuff, most manufacturers were offshoring, moving to, South America or Southeast Asia, and I would tell people I wanted to start a manufacturing company. They look at me cross-eyed, like, "Are you crazy?" But yeah, I ended up getting an SBIR grant, which is a great program. If you're not familiar with SBIR, you should be aware of it. The federal government gives away $3.8 billion a year to innovative small companies. That means any company under 500 employees. And so I ended up getting an SBIR from the EPA, doing some great research. A couple of Purdue researchers looked at my product, did side-by-side growth tests with PittMoss and PittMoss, and realized that I could, one, help develop recycling markets for paper, and two, reduce the need for the natural product, peat, which would eventually, if left untouched, would turn into coal. And so it does have a connection to climate change. So I ended up in Pittsburgh. I was raising money, had sold my house, cashed out my 401k, built a full-size proof of concept plant that was not automated, had no automation to it, and was not commercially viable. But I needed to build that just to prove the concept that it could be built commercially viable. And so got a call to go on Shark Tank and raised $1.2 million from a group of investors from Pittsburgh and Mark Cuban from Shark Tank. And the rest, as they say, is history. We built a manufacturing plant in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, using my existing equipment, and added some automation. And every year since 2015, we've doubled our sales, doubled our revenues, and we just announced recently our second plant. So I think things are going well. While all that was happening, I had a father who was suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's and really had no one to care for him. So I decided to take the leap. An early investor in PittMoss, who had manufacturing experience, jumped into the CEO role and has done a phenomenal job. And I came back to care for my father and got the job here at Purdue Northwest. The chancellor has a big background from Florida Central University, and he was the dean of the College of Business. Was really instrumental in creating the commercialization centers across Central Florida, and he wanted to do the same thing here in Northwest Indiana. So he heard my story. He said, "Look, anybody who can commercialize a product they invented and build a manufacturing plant and raise the money probably knows a few things about commercializing new products." So he assigned me to this position, and it's been a great fit, especially since I'm now developing a second patented product called Plantennas, which is every bit of automation requires unit level sensoring. So like when a plant like Tesla is building a new vehicle, every part has to have a sensor tag on it, essentially, whether it's a QR code or a zebra code or even like an RFID. That robot that's building the car needs a unit level sensor. So I just thought, well, what's the unit level of plants, of greenhouses, in nurseries, of even growing produce? And it was a unit level sensor would be a propagation pot. To the start of every new seed, every new plant cutting will require a propagation pot. So it's a propagation pot with a sensor embedded in it, and we're actually being called an ag tech company, which I was thinking we were, I didn't really know what we were calling ourselves, but now investors are calling us an ag tech company. So I accept their word for that. I don't know if I'll be able to go back on Shark Tank for this one, but it may not be necessary.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, you have a fantastic story and experience to go along with that. Let me ask you this. If you had to go back to when you started, what things do you know today that you would change that could help other people as they're getting off the ground with their manufacturing? What things would you change if you could go back now with your hindsight being 2020, what would you change?
Well, I didn't really. I mean, I came from a family that had business people. My grandfather, my father, my great grandfather, all had businesses in the same town I grew up in, but they were like, a real estate firm or a small grocer or an ice cream stand. I started working when I was 12 years old at my grandfather's ice cream stand, which, as a fat kid, man, I was in heaven. I really was. But I had no one to really like talk to about manufacturing. And, this is really the reason why I ended up relocating the manufacturing plant for PittMoss in Pittsburgh. And the reason the product's called PittMoss, I couldn't find a mentor here in Northwest Indiana, which is, if no one knows this, I mean, Northwest Indiana is probably one of the highest GDP rated areas for industrialization, for manufacturing. I mean, we do heavy duty manufacturing in Northwest Indiana and South Chicago, and so I could not find any sort of mentor support to help me build a manufacturing plant here. And so, if I could look back and give myself some advice, it would be find a mentor. Do what you have to do. Offer to bring a sandwich to somebody's office and have a conversation with them for lunch. Those types of things really do work. Just having the ambition and the fire in your belly really does impress people, So, I always say there's a fine line between pest and persistence. And, an entrepreneur has to learn where that line is, and just ride it right in to get the information that you need. But yeah, I think finding a mentor early, I did find the information I needed. After, searching for, I'm going to say at least a decade on how I could manufacture this product. And we built a one-of-a-kind manufacturing facility. I don't have an engineering background. I have a degree from Purdue, but it's a history degree. So I think, when I finally brought a consultant in to make the plant efficient at PittMoss, he's like, "How did you know how to build this?" I was like, "You know what? I read a lot, So he was pretty impressed, and he was a process engineer from Purdue. So I guess if you have a good ability to comprehend and read, maybe you can figure this out. And I would say that again about like the robotics. You don't need a robotic or a tech degree or an engineering degree to understand this stuff now. There are robotic arms out there that are trainable. They're collaborative. You could probably figure out how to program a robotic arm in 5-10 minutes. And that robot will work and do what you program it to do until you tell it to stop. Doesn't need a smoke break, doesn't need health insurance, is not going to call off if the Steeler game goes late and they got too drunk. I mean, you're going to have a solid investment there. And a robotic arm, an articulating arm, is financeable at the bank.
Right. Yep. Those are all very valid points, and especially today, you see more companies that are actually creating better user interfaces that are more intuitive, that are more graphic user interfaces where it's kind of drag and drop principles where you're actually, okay, I want to be able to move this in this direction, and you just kind of do that on the screen, or you actually can physically move the arm where you want it to be, and then you can control the accelerate and decelerate rates as well as how fast you want it to move. But you start with the basics of what is the range of motion that you want to control. And you're 110% correct with the collaborative robots and a lot of the bigger ones. Well, that you're not going to drag and move them, but those ones, those pendants that they have today, completely change the game of what somebody has to know in order to do it. Used to be in the robots, you had to go plug in a laptop and you had to go sit there for hours trying to program
write code.
it. Yep. Not anymore.
There's a lot of parallel between what's happening now and what happened with desktop computing. I mean, the difference was, when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple Computer, they were in a computer club and they were writing their own code, and they said, well, we should be able to do this and provide people, some limited software, and that's what started the whole revolution in computers and desktop computing. Totally changed the world. I remember starting my career, and there was an administrative assistant for every executive in the company I worked for, and within 5-10 years, there was maybe one for every 5 or 6 executives, because everyone was doing their own writing on their desktop. They didn't need administrative assistants to, take their handwritten notes and turn it into a piece of mail. It really has completely changed, and I feel that same way about robotics right now. I look at the space in the context of greenhouses and nurseries, and I look at all the predictive human labor in the tasks that we assign people in those industries. And there are at least 5 or 6 basic tasks that can easily translate to a robotic arm, very easily.
Right.
And so I don't see, when I hear people say, oh, I can't really afford to do that. Dean, I just paid less than $3,000 for an articulating arm from a local robotics company. And that's going to be for some high-end research that we received from the federal government to do on creating a virtual workforce. People who can sit at home, watch a camera feed on their laptop or their home TV, and use their gaming system to select, the ripe tomatoes in this case. And that feeds back into a cyber physical system, and the robot will actually pick the ripe piece of tomato that the person sitting at home selected. Okay, so that's transformative information, and that's all based basically can be done now. We're kind of thinking about lateral thinking of existing technology at that point.
And I think that one of the unique things is that when you combine robotics with things like additive, where you're 3D printing the actual grippers or the part that you're actually doing the work with on the robots, you find that you can make those type of grasping objects, whether it's, if you want to mimic a hand, they have ones now that will mimic a hand. They have ones that will mimic a squid. I think there's squid, and there's even there's a derivation of that called an octopus one, and it will wrap around something without having to squeeze it and compress it. It can wrap around and grasp it in a different way for objects that potentially, let's say a tomato, you wouldn't have to specifically use a hand or a gripper that would close just in 2 points. It would instead wrap around it. And you can build those things on a 3D printer now.
Yep.
And if you're a technology person, this is the time. I mean, we've had other times where people have said it is, because
it's an absolute golden age.
When you talked about how computers were, I would put this age today up against that, not because we're so much surpassing things, even though that's happening, but the availability, as you said, a $3,000 articulating arm. You can get a drone for a few $100s.
Few $100, yeah.
All of these things, and you can go and do roof inspections for a few $100s and do that kind of business. There's opportunities here, and I think, talking about entrepreneurs, this is a great time to be an entrepreneur because the investment is so much smaller to get in the door with. If you just have a unique idea and a great concept and a good business model, I think there's a greater opportunity today than there probably has been in a long time.
I see that every day, and one of the things you were talking about, the grippers and the end tools. Purdue Northwest is unusual in the fact that, one, we started. We were born from our mothership in West Lafayette. But during World War II, they needed more mechanical engineers, and that's when they were transforming all the factories that made tractors into tanks. And so they needed the war armaments, and they needed the mechanical engineers to help make those transitions happen. And we've always had manufacturing in our DNA because of the nature of our GDP in this area. It's all industrial. We were also the very first American university to receive accreditation for our mechatronics program and our mechanical engineering technology program. And that is the basis for automation and robotics and manufacturing. So we literally are now taking what we've learned in the last 20 years of automating Fortune 500 companies, are trying to spin that out to small and medium-sized enterprises, but also, the agriculture community. I don't mean this in a slight at all, but they're technologically ignorant. They're not educated in tech. Very few people are, and they'll admit that themselves. And I don't mean that as a slight, because a lot of farmers and a lot of horticulturists, they know a lot about farming that I don't know. So we should be working together, and that's what Purdue Northwest is actually working on right now. We are trying to, still that lateral thinking with, current technology or existing technology. What we know about manufacturing can also be spun out for ag tech.
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's no question that there's an opportunity there in every type of industry. We can look to improve using new technologies that are being developed, especially like right now, AI is becoming a big thing. Imagine how when we used to do things of going around and looking at, like you're talking about, looking at produce even. I would have to physically go and walk around and look at that and look for the right product. Imagine that you could do that with cameras or with drones, and then do a map and then input that map into AI to say, well, what did we do differently? Here's how much water we were doing. Here's how much sunlight this area gets versus this area. What are the challenges and what are some of the outcomes? And then developing a better mousetrap, so to speak. Do you see more opportunities for that?
Yes. So about a year ago, I had a student whose family owned a parsley farm near Fort Wayne, Indiana, and he was trying to build a robotic piece of equipment that could actually go up and down the rows of parsley and harvest. He was calling it the parsley harvester. And so, our kids, our Purdue Northwest students, they get to own their intellectual property 100%. That's kind of unusual for universities. And so I actually developed a program here to help them patent their inventions. And it's actually a great way to create generational wealth, is to own your intellectual property. And so we encourage this kind of behavior. We encourage it. So every type of produce that exists out there, you're going to have end tools. You're going to have specialized equipment. I don't know if you saw this or not, but just, what was it the other day? Yesterday, breaking news. John Deere acquired a company called Bear Flag Robotics for $250,000. So, establishment of agriculture is now understanding this completely. And so, we've got a bunch of mechatronics students, and I'll even throw the hat in for the engineers here at Purdue, that they have some great futures ahead of them if they are involved in creating new robotics for agriculture.
That's great to hear. I think that sometimes it's easy to get bogged down into some of the negatives of millennials or some of the things that can be negatively kind of impacted, that somebody say, well, this isn't happening. But I tell people all the time, I've gone and participated in things like Vex Robotics and some of the other competitions. And when you see these students and see their passion for being involved in learning technology, you can't help but be inspired by what that opportunity brings to them and to us as a whole. Have you seen those students? Do they have programs now where they're trying to develop those same concepts into ideas that they can move forward with? I know you mentioned the ability to own their own patents. Have you found that to be inspirational to them to continue to say, yeah, then I want to go and do this on my own?
Absolutely. I think that they get this idea, like, I can get a piece of the pie, and that makes them very motivated. I tell my story all the time too about, like, we do have a lot of, social warriors out there and environmental warriors as well. And I tell my story all the time about, I'm an entrepreneur, but yeah, I'm also an environmental activist. Like, I'm trying to get people to stop digging up wetlands and harvesting the stuff that, here's my point. Only 3% of the Earth's land surface is peat bogs, and it controls or sequesters, or banks rather, a third of all soil carbon. And as we're disturbing these areas, as we're draining them to dig up the peat, we're actually contributing to more carbon in the atmosphere. Now, I'm not an engineer, an environmental scientist. I can't tell you if that's creating climate change, but why should we be, digging up these wetlands and putting more carbon in the atmosphere just to put in petunia pots? I mean, we've actually proven now that we can use waste paper, essentially, to do the same thing. So instead of digging up holes in one part of the world and filling up holes in other parts of the world, maybe we should just use our trash to, fill up flower pots. But I tell the students this story, and I tell them that they can also be environmental activists, by being an entrepreneur. And I'm telling you, I think that really resonates with this generation of kids.
Yeah, I think that they look for something that's a win-win. Yes, they want to be able to do something that's profitable and make a living at it, but at the same time, what is the end result? Is there something that we can have an impact on the future of not only of society, but the environment and everything else? And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that sometimes we get bogged down in saying, well, it's this or this. Well, why can't it be both? You talk about...
In many respects, going forward, I think most businesses will be both.
Right. I think
because there's actually benefit to, like, the program that we're developing, or the research we're doing right now. What is the benefit of not having people go out to fields and pick produce, as opposed to a robotic piece of equipment in the field and someone sitting at home going through a cyber system or an Internet of Robotic Things system to pick that produce? One, the person doesn't have to drive there, doesn't have to burn fuel to get to that location, doesn't have to basically be in the field, doesn't have potentially the fact of potentially getting infected in the case we're under right now. I think there's many benefits to even something like that.
Right. And have you seen that you've had to shift the way that even some of the courses are taught to try and include an environmental, not necessarily environmental, but an impactful statement? So not just, here's what you're going to get out of this, you're going to get a job and that after you graduate, but something that you can change the world, that kind of statement, or that kind of an outcome that people feel like, yeah, I'm part of something. I did this and that impacted this. Do you see more of a need to fill that gap, so to speak, for people to understand what they're doing? That, yeah, you're not just picking up garbage. You are you're contributing to the greater quality of life that people have, because what you're doing is eliminating waste from these areas, and you're removing the opportunity for things like rodents to feed off of and live in. Do you feel that there's more of a need to do that now?
Well, I'm not technically an educator. I'm a staff member here that helps educate people who want to be entrepreneurial, who have created inventions and things like that. So I don't necessarily see the full complexity of the students, but I have talked to faculty members who've definitely seen a change happening. That the students, these types of social and environmental impacts are at front of mind. It's something that they have seen since they were kids. They've heard the stories from the news and, movies and our leaders, politicians who have basically talked about climate change and whether this is actually, climate change or not, they think of it. And the thought is, if we can use less and still be the same efficiencies, why wouldn't we do it? And I think it's actually a fairly decent argument. It's like the argument for, solar and wind power. Okay. Could we use more of it? It doesn't, I don't see any negative downside to it.
Right.
And I think that's what the students think too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I could be completely wrong. I've seen some problems in California. The grid in California had some issues, but I still think that burning less coal and digging up less peat is probably a good thing for our overall environment. So, I think the kids really do think. I really do think that's necessary for them. And so, if people are listening and they're trying to recruit from this, generation of students, anything that you could put forward is positive social and environmental programs that your company's involved in, and it's going to help improve the recruitment. I have a feeling about that to be true.
Right. Okay. Tell everybody, we're right out of time here, but tell everybody where they can reach you and how they can reach you.
So you can reach me at Purdue University Northwest in Hammond, Indiana. I'm at, if you just type in the acronym PNW, CMEC, you will find the Purdue University Northwest Commercialization and Manufacturing Excellence Center. And there is a info email there, and I will be able to respond.
Excellent. It's been great to have you here today, Mont, and I wish you nothing but the best moving forward. Go out and make it a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.